Today, we remember Gia Carangi, a beautiful, troubled soul who once ruled the fashion world and died far too young at just 26. Gia was an American supermodel who exploded onto the scene in the late 1970s and quickly became a face no one could forget, gracing the covers of Vogue and Cosmopolitan, modeling for Dior, Armani, Versus, and Yves Saint Laurent, and redefining beauty in an industry crowded with polished blondes. She had an edgy look, an untamed energy, and a raw presence that made her unforgettable. But behind the camera flashes, Gia was hurting. Her life began in Philadelphia, where she was born in 1960 into a fractured home. Her mother abandoned the family when Gia was just 11, and from then on, she was always chasing the love she felt she'd lost. As a teenager, she fell into the world of glam, Bowie-inspired rebellion, and slowly made her way into modeling. At just 17, she moved to New York, signed with Wilhelmina Models, and rose to the top almost overnight. But fame didn't heal the wounds from her childhood. After losing her mentor Wilhelmina Cooper to cancer, Gia spiraled into heroin addiction. Her habit became so serious that she was visibly using during shoots, with track marks sometimes showing in published photos. As her addiction worsened, her career faded. She was dropped by agencies, avoided by friends, and eventually left New York behind. She tried to get clean many times, going through rehab, working regular jobs in department stores, and even in a nursing home cafeteria. But she always found herself back in the dark grip of drugs. By late 1985, she had turned to prostitution in Atlantic City and was living a life far removed from the glamorous one she'd once had. That same year, Gia was diagnosed with AIDS after being hospitalized for pneumonia, likely the result of sharing contaminated needles. She became one of the first famous women in America to die from the disease. In October 1986, she was admitted to Hahnemann University Hospital in Philadelphia. She was weak, worn out, and no longer had the strength to fight. A month later, on November 18, 1986, Gia Carangi passed away, alone and quietly, without a single person from the fashion world attending her funeral. Her death was almost invisible to the industry she helped shape. Yet decades later, her story still moves people. Angelina Jolie's haunting performance in the 1998 film Gia brought her back into the spotlight, reminding the world that behind the covers and campaigns was a young woman who just wanted love and never stopped hurting. Gia's life was chaotic, beautiful, messy, and tragic. She was a pioneer, not just in fashion, but in being openly gay during a time when few dared. Her rise was like a rocket, her fall was heartbreaking, and her legacy is one of both dazzling beauty and unbearable pain. Gia didn't just model clothes, she modeled vulnerability, freedom, and the deep cost of never feeling truly loved. She was the first supermodel, and her story is one of the saddest the fashion world has ever known. Tina Chow, an American model and jewelry designer whose life ended far too soon due to AIDS. She passed away on January 24, 1992, at just 41 years old, from complications related to the disease that she had bravely battled for years. In her final days, Tina had left behind the glitzy, fast-paced world of fame and nightlife, choosing a quiet life in California where she focused on healing, meditation, and a macrobiotic diet. She had contracted HIV in the mid-1980s during an affair with a French aristocrat who himself died of AIDS shortly after, and by June 1989, her diagnosis was confirmed. Instead of hiding, she came forward with her illness, a bold and rare move at the time, hoping to raise awareness and help others who are suffering in silence. She worked with AIDS charities like Project Angel Food and never stopped designing, even while her health declined. Her death wasn't just the end of a life. It was the silencing of a voice that stood strong in a time of fear, judgment, and misunderstanding. Tina was born Bettina Louise Lutz in Lakewood, Ohio, in 1950, to a Japanese mother and German-American father. Her family later moved to Japan, where Tina and her sister were discovered as teenage models for Shiseido. This launched her into the fashion world, where she became a muse to legends like Andy Warhol, Yves Saint Laurent, and Issey Miyake. She was never a follower of trends, Tina was the trend. Her sharp Eden haircut, minimalist taste, An ability to pair simple everyday clothes with high fashion made her unforgettable. She was named on the International Best Dressed list in 1985 and became known not just for how she looked, but how she thought and lived. In the late 1980s, she transitioned into jewelry design, creating powerful, earthy pieces using bamboo, quartz, and raw stones. Her Kyoto bracelet became iconic, a quiet symbol of beauty and strength, much like Tina herself. She married Michael Chow, owner of the Mr. Chow restaurant empire, and had 2 children, including daughter China Chow. But despite the wealth, glamour, and art world fame, Tina's story ended in heartbreak. As AIDS slowly took over her body, she stayed calm, focused, and full of quiet grace. She tried to treat her illness naturally, but in the end, the virus was too strong. She died at home, leaving behind a legacy that still shapes fashion and jewelry to this day. Her pieces rarely go to auction, not because they're forgotten, but because those lucky enough to own them refuse to let them go. Tina Chow wasn't just a style icon. She was a brave, thoughtful woman whose influence lives on in the hands of designers, in the memories of artists, and in the hearts of those who continue to wear what she created. AIDS may have taken her body, but it never erased her mark. Cookie Mueller, a wild-hearted American actress and writer whose life was full of chaos, beauty, and unstoppable energy, but whose story came to a heartbreaking end when she died from AIDS-related pneumonia on November 10, 1989, at just 40 years old. In her final months, Cookie was living in New York, fighting a disease that had already taken her husband, Italian artist Vittorio Scarpati, just 7 weeks earlier. After watching him fade away, she knew her time was short too. She didn't hide from it. Instead, she poured herself into her writing and her friendships, while her body slowly gave up. By the time she passed away at Cabrini Medical Center, the vibrant woman who once lit up every room with her laugh had become another casualty of a cruel epidemic that society at the time barely wanted to talk about. Her ashes were scattered across the world, on the beach in Provincetown, in a New York flowerbed, in Italy beside her husband, under the arms of Christ the Redeemer in Brazil, in the South Bronx, and even into the Ganges River, just like she lived, everywhere at once. Cookie's life was anything but ordinary. Born Dorothy Karen Mueller in Maryland in 1949, she got the nickname Cookie before she could walk. As a kid, she filled her world with turtles and tadpoles, made her own books at age 11, and dyed her hair constantly as a teenager because it made her feel alive. She lived like she was allergic to boredom, hitchhiking, doing drugs, getting into wild scenes, escaping would-be attackers, hanging with the Manson girls without knowing it, meeting Jimi Hendrix, and accidentally ending up in a mental hospital where she received electroshock therapy that wiped her memory clean. Somehow, all this only added to her fire. She became a cult figure when John Waters cast her in his early films like Multiple Maniacs, Pink Flamingos, and Desperate Living. Her performances were raw and unforgettable. She didn't just act, she was. Later, she moved to New York, where she became a writer, a columnist, and a powerful voice in the East Village art scene, known for her funny, blunt, brilliant stories. Her writing, especially in her book Walking Through Clear Water in a Pool Painted Black, captured the madness of her life in short, sharp bursts. She was best friends with photographer Nan Golden, who documented Cookie's last years and death in a heartbreaking photo series. But AIDS didn't just take her life, it took her husband, her health, and the future she could have had. Even near the end, Cookie faced death the same way she faced life, with clear eyes and dark humor. She once wrote, "You will be the same except you won't have to worry about rent or mortgages or fashionable clothes. You will be free." Her words feel even heavier now. She was a mother, a dreamlander, a punk, a healer, a wild storyteller, and someone who lived more in 40 years than most could in 100. But in the end, AIDS robbed her of everything: her body, her voice, her freedom. And that's the part that hurts the most. Cookie Mueller didn't go quietly. She laughed, she raged, she told the truth. And then she was gone. Elizabeth Glaser, a woman who didn't just suffer through one of the most heartbreaking chapters in medical history, She stood up and changed its course. Elizabeth was an AIDS activist and the wife of actor Paul Michael Glaser. But long before she became a public figure, she was a loving mother, a wife, and a woman simply trying to bring her daughter safely into the world. In 1981, while giving birth to her first child, Ariel, she hemorrhaged and needed a blood transfusion. What no one knew then was that the blood she received carried the HIV virus. This was the earliest phase of the AIDS epidemic, when even doctors didn't fully understand the disease. Elizabeth wasn't tested. No one thought to check, and she unknowingly passed the virus to her daughter through breastfeeding. Ariel began to fall ill, and by 1986, doctors confirmed what seemed impossible. Ariel had AIDS. Then came another blow. Elizabeth herself was HIV positive, and her son Jake, born in 1984, had also been infected in utero. Her husband was the only one untouched by the virus. At that time, there were no treatments for children with HIV, and the world was full of fear, ignorance, and silence. Elizabeth fought hard to get her daughter access to the only known drug, AZT, but it had only been approved for adults. The medicine came too late. In 1988, Ariel died at just 7 years old. Elizabeth could have stayed quiet in her grief, but instead, she stood up. She co-founded the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, spoke powerfully at the 1992 Democratic National Convention, and lobbied Congress to fund research for children battling HIV. She told the world what she and her family endured, not to get sympathy, but to save lives. But while she fought for others, her own health continued to decline. On December 3, 1994, at just 47 years old, Elizabeth Glaser died from complications of AIDS in her Santa Monica home, leaving behind her son Jake, who had survived against the odds, partly because of a rare gene that gave his immune system extra protection. Elizabeth's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a symbol of a time when too many lives were lost in silence, and too few people in power cared to act. Yet from that pain came purpose. Elizabeth was born in New York City in 1947 and had built a quiet life as an educator and museum director before tragedy turned her into one of the most important voices in the fight against pediatric AIDS. Her foundation has now helped millions of women and children get tested, treated, and live longer, healthier lives. Her son Jake has grown into an advocate too, traveling the world to educate others and carry forward the fight his mother began. Elizabeth's legacy is not just in the speeches she gave or the policies she helped change, but in every life that was saved because she refused to give up. She never got to grow old, never got to watch her son become a man, but she made sure that countless others would get that chance. Her story is one of love, pain, courage, and an unbreakable will to protect children, starting with her own. Sharon Redd, the incredible American singer whose voice once lit up dance floors and touched hearts around the world, but whose life was cut painfully short on May 1, 1992, when she died at just 46 from complications related to AIDS. In the final months of her life, Sharon had been trying to make a comeback, hoping to reclaim her place in the spotlight, but her body had grown too weak to fight off a serious case of pneumonia, brought on after stepping on broken glass during a performance, a wound that turned dangerous because the AIDS virus had already destroyed her immune system. Her death shocked many, not just because she was gone too soon, but because the world had failed to protect her and so many others like her. Born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1945, Sharon came from a musical family. Her father worked in the industry, and her half-sister Penny Ford would later become famous as the voice of Snap. Sharon first found fame in the late 1960s, releasing a string of soulful singles, and then rising to stardom in Australia with the rock musical Hair. She faced racism and rejection, even being forced to leave Australia at one point, but she kept going. By the late 70s, she was touring with Bette Midler as one of the Harlots, and her solo career soon exploded with hits like Can You Handle It?, Never Give You Up, and Beat the Street. Sharon had a voice that made people move, but there was always depth behind the disco beats. Her sound was powerful, soulful, and real. She wasn't just another performer in glitter. She brought heart to every track she touched. In the early 90s, her song, Can You Handle It, got a second life in the UK. and for a brief moment it looked like Sharon Redd was coming back strong. But then she got sick. The virus that had taken so many before her quietly took her too, and because she was a black woman and a disco artist, the industry didn't talk about it the way they should have. Her death became a footnote in the larger AIDS crisis, which often ignored the black women at its center. But Sharon mattered. Her music still plays in clubs, in homes, in hearts. And beyond the records, she left behind a legacy of resilience and joy. She gave everything to her art, and she deserved more time. Sharon Redd was more than a disco queen. She was a fighter, a survivor, and a woman whose voice still carries, even in silence. Khloe Dzubilo, a fierce, fearless, and unforgettable voice from New York's underground art and music scene, who tragically passed away on February 18, 2011, at just 50 years old, after living for over 2 decades with HIV. Khloe was diagnosed in 1987, the same year she lost her partner of 9 years, Bobby Bradley, to AIDS. The virus hit her at a time when an HIV diagnosis felt like a death sentence. But Khloe chose to live, to fight, to create, and to speak out. In her final years, Khloe's health slowly declined, and like so many transgender people living with HIV, she faced stigma not only from the world, but from the very systems meant to care for her. She had long spoken about how many trans people die at home because of the medical neglect they experience, and sadly, her words became part of her own story. Her ashes were scattered at a wild horse sanctuary in California, free like her spirit. Khloe's life started in Connecticut, where she was a champion equestrian, but her heart belonged to New York City. She moved there in 1982 and quickly became a key part of its club culture, working briefly at Studio 54 before becoming ad director at the East Village, just as the downtown art scene was exploding. She performed with the Black Lips Performance Cult at the Pyramid Club, edited their zine, and fronted the punk band Transistors, who weren't afraid to scream about AIDS when no one else would. She also studied art at Parsons and earned a degree in gender studies. But learning was never just on paper for her. Khloe lived what she believed. She was an HIV activist, a trans rights warrior, and the first trans person to appear on the cover of Pause magazine. She founded the EquiAid Project to help children affected by AIDS experience the healing power of horseback riding, bringing together the past she came from and the life she built. She led outreach programs, spoke at conferences, created federally funded prevention programs for transgender sex workers, and used her voice to make sure others didn't have to suffer in silence. Her style was loud, her words were raw, and her presence was unforgettable. Marc Jacobs, Patricia Field, and countless photographers found inspiration in her, not because she was trying to be a muse, but because she was simply herself, honest, broken, beautiful, and brave. Even as her health faded, her art remained, her drawings becoming a quiet way to speak when her body couldn't scream anymore. Khloe Dzubilo wasn't just an artist or a musician or an activist. She was all of those things at once and more. She made people look, listen, and care. She was loved deeply by her friends and her community. And though the world never gave her the recognition she truly deserved, she left behind a legacy that still echoes through New York streets, galleries, and memories. Khloe didn't just survive with HIV. She lived fully with it, laughed with it, and raged against it. And that courage is something the world should never forget. Lisa DeLeeuw, a bold and unforgettable name from the golden age of adult films, who tragically passed away on November 11, 1993, from complications related to AIDS, a silent and deadly illness that took away so many lives, especially during the years when fear and stigma often mattered more than care. Lisa had been diagnosed with HIV in 1991, and as her health declined, she quietly disappeared from public life. She died young, at just 35 years old, with far too much life still ahead of her. In her final days, she wasn't surrounded by fame or lights or applause, but instead faced the brutal reality of an illness that had already taken many of her peers. There were conflicting stories about her death for years, some saying she was alive and living privately, but others close to her confirmed the heartbreaking truth. She died from AIDS-related illness, another victim of a system that failed to protect those in the adult film world. Born Lisa Trego in Moline, Illinois, in 1958, she started out as a teenager who never really felt pretty, overweight, insecure, just trying to figure herself out. After dropping weight and gaining confidence, she found herself in Los Angeles, chasing money, stability, and maybe even fame. What started as nude modeling quickly turned into adult film work, and from 1978 to 1987, Lisa became one of the most recognized and loved stars of her time. With her natural red hair, curvy body, and a lion head pendant that matched her Dutch last name, DeLeeuw, meaning the lion, she roared through over 200 films, including classics like Amanda by Night, Raw Talent, and Dixie Ray, Hollywood Star. She wasn't just a pretty face. She had fire, attitude, and genuine acting skills that made her performances stand out. She won multiple Best Supporting Actress awards and became one of the first to sign an exclusive contract with Vivid Video, a powerhouse in the adult film industry. Lisa had a tough, no-nonsense charm, but she also had heart, something that came through both on and off screen. After leaving the industry in 1987, she focused on dancing and live appearances, but the shadows of the AIDS crisis had already started closing in. When the virus caught up with her, it pushed her out of public life for good. And like so many others in that era, her death didn't make headlines. It was passed around in whispers, buried in rumors, and often denied. But the pain was real, and so was her story. Lisa DeLeeuw wasn't just an adult film star. She was a woman who lived fast, loved hard, worked relentlessly, and in the end, suffered quietly. She was part of an era that was wild and risky and electric, but also deeply dangerous for those who gave their bodies and their youth to the camera. Her legacy lives on in film archives and awards halls, but her death should remind us of the thousands of voices lost too soon to a virus that thrived in silence. Lisa deserved better, and today, we say her name not just to remember the work she did, but the life she lived and the unfair way it was taken from her. Connie Fleming, the unforgettable trans model, artist, performer, and New York nightlife icon who left behind a powerful legacy of resilience, creativity, and truth before passing away on January 18, 2025, after a long and deeply personal fight with a rare cancer linked to breast implants, a battle that highlighted the medical system's blind spots and the emotional toll that stigma can take, especially on transgender women of color. Connie's final years were filled with pain that was often ignored or misdiagnosed, beginning with an itching in her chest that she dismissed for years, thinking it was just irritation from a bra. But in 2017, the itching became unbearable, and she finally went for her first ever mammogram, where doctors discovered anaplastic large cell lymphoma caused by textured breast implants, a diagnosis that shook her to the core. She underwent surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. And while there were moments of hope when scans came back clear, the emotional weight of the illness, paired with years of mistreatment and fear of seeking help, took a toll that most couldn't see. Connie often spoke about how hard it was to get care as a Black trans woman, how doctors didn't take her seriously, and how years of feeling dismissed made her hesitate to even ask for help. But despite all of it, she kept showing up for the next generation, for her community, and for herself. Born in Jamaica and raised in Brooklyn, Connie's early life was full of trauma and bullying, but she found light in fashion and art. Her journey into New York's legendary club scene as Connie Girl made her a star below 14th Street, turning heads with her performances and later making history as one of the first trans women to walk the runways in Paris and New York for legends like Therese Mugler and Vivienne Westwood. But her success didn't protect her from hate. She faced constant transphobia in fashion, and was quietly blacklisted by some after refusing to entertain invasive questions about her identity. Still, she kept rising, working as a doorwoman in iconic clubs like Leeuw, producing fashion shows, and later coaching models for brands like Prada and Versus. Connie built a reputation not just on her style, but on her strength. She was fearless, sharp, and never backed down, even when it cost her work. Off the runway, she poured her heart into mentoring young trans girls and artists, reminding them they deserve to take up space in the world. Her cancer diagnosis didn't stop her from using her voice. She went public about her experience to protect others from waiting too long, telling people to check themselves, to not be afraid, and to demand better. She didn't want pity. She wanted change. And now, even in death, her story is saving lives. Connie Fleming was more than a fashion icon. She was a fighter, a trailblazer, and a truth teller who turned every part of her pain into power. Her life was full of color, fire, and honesty, and the world is quieter without her in it. But what she gave us, the beauty, the bravery, the refusal to be erased, will never be forgotten. Sandra Bréa, the bold and unforgettable Brazilian actress, model, and performer whose life was as groundbreaking as it was heartbreaking. Sandra passed away on May 4, 2000, just a week before her 48th birthday, after a long and painful battle with AIDS-related complications and lung cancer. In her final months, she struggled with severe illness, her body growing weaker as the cancer spread and her HIV-related health issues took an even greater toll. She was in constant care, needing around-the-clock help, a special diet, and countless medications. On her last day, she simply asked her caretaker for pears and apples before suddenly suffering respiratory failure at her home in Rio de Janeiro. That would be the final moment for a woman who had once danced, laughed, and lit up stages and screens across Brazil. She had revealed her HIV diagnosis back in 1993, at a time when people with the virus faced cruel judgment and were often abandoned by the very industry they gave everything to. After she came forward with her diagnosis, the offers stopped coming, no more roles, no more chances. She faced rejection, silence, and fear from the same world that once adored her, yet she refused to hide or feel shame. She used her voice to speak up for others, to fight stigma, to educate and show that a diagnosis didn't erase someone's humanity. Her final months were marked by pain, physical decline, and isolation, but she faced it all with strength and grace, even when the cameras had turned away. Born in Rio de Janeiro in 1952, Sandra started working as a model when she was just 13, then moved into theater by 17, performing alongside legends like Fernando Montenegro. She became a rising star at TV Globo in the early 70s, landing her breakthrough role in O Bem Amado and later appearing in dozens of popular soap operas, comedies, and variety shows. But Sandra wasn't just a TV star. She became Brazil's biggest sex symbol of the 70s, gracing magazine covers like Playboy and starring in films that pushed boundaries during the military dictatorship. Her open, fearless sexuality made her iconic, but it also made her a target. Still, she kept going, showing the world she could be glamorous, funny, strong, and real all at once. Her talent was everywhere, on screen, on stage, in film, and she brought joy, sensuality, and honesty to everything she did. She never had a biological child, but she adopted a son, Alexander, and loved him deeply. Behind the fame and beauty was a woman who had survived so much. She lost her mother to suicide in 1987. She fought stigma after her HIV diagnosis, and she battled cancer in silence until it took her. Even in the face of pain and rejection, Sandra stayed generous, humorous, and brave. Her death left Brazil in mourning, and though time has passed, her legacy lives on not just through her work, but through her fight to be seen, heard, and loved. Sandra Bréa was more than a star. She was a voice that refused to be silenced, a woman who never stopped being herself, even when the world turned its back. Cláudia Magno, a vibrant Brazilian actress and dancer whose life was tragically cut short at just 35 years old. She died on January 6, 1994, after suffering acute respiratory failure caused by AIDS-related complications, including a severe lung infection and septic shock. In her final days, she was hospitalized at the São Vicente Clinic in Gavia, where she spent nearly a month fighting for her life. Her condition grew worse with each passing day, and in her final week, she slipped into a coma and never regained consciousness. At the time of her death, she was still working, filming the soap opera Só No Mew where she played Nurse Josefina, and rehearsing for a new stage musical. But behind the scenes, her health had begun to fail quickly, and within weeks she was gone. It shocked the public, and though her family never confirmed whether she had AIDS, those closest to her knew the truth and respected her wish for privacy. Her death came with whispers and rumors, like so many others who passed during that time. But what no one questioned was how loved she was, how talented, and how much was lost the day she died. Cláudia was born in Rio de Janeiro on February 10, 1958, and first found her voice through dance and theater before making her breakthrough in 1982 with the hit movie Menino do Rio, which turned her into a pop culture icon. She became known as the Girl from Rio, the face of Brazil's sunny, free-spirited 1980s generation. With her fresh beauty and natural charm, she starred in soap operas like Final Fellas, Roda de Fogo, Fera Radical, Tita, and O Dono do Mundo, capturing hearts all over the country. Her role as Silvana in Tita made her especially unforgettable. She wasn't just another actress. She was a symbol of youth, confidence, and warmth. Off-screen, she appeared in music videos, won awards, and was even honored with the Condongo Best Actress prize at the Brasilia Film Festival in 1988. But none of her success could protect her from the cruel illness that slowly took her away. AIDS was a silent killer in the early 90s, surrounded by fear and shame, and it took many lives in silence. Cláudia was one of them, young, beautiful, and gone too soon. Her death broke hearts across Brazil, and even now, decades later, the sadness lingers. She left behind a career full of promise, a legacy of joy, and a reminder of how fragile life can be. Cláudia Magno didn't just entertain, she inspired, and her memory still lives on through the roles she brought to life and the people who loved her.